Hey, darlings. Masha put the bucket on the bench and heard the handle rattle on the side of the wall. Her hands were already sore from the amount of buckets that she had already carried into the house, but it was too early to relax. You need at least as much as that. Maria had never lived in the village before this year, and everyone associated with this craving was double-edged. You can't go anywhere. If you need it, then you need it. But to her, the city's brain of bones, with such heat, the weekdays were remembered in the middle of the flooded streets, long paved streets, the bustle and noise of a large residential area. Here, in the deafening and crumbling, impenetrable seemed silence, she should have a rest with her soul, but it did not work. It could not. Maybe she's wrong? Or Vanya was wrong in his assumptions, especially since she liked it so much at first. But look at you. And here are two helpless people on her hands. An old man whose offspring will be born soon in the 80s, and a child who is only 3. And everyone needs care. They need to prepare, to wash, and to take care of, and to take care of. And her? When will she think about herself? Masha sighed heavily and even slightly gasped. Well, okay. Time is running out. And if she slows down a little more, she won't have time to do everything she planned before dark. And if Vanya comes and sees that something is wrong in the house, he will swear. So it's better to hurry up while there is such an opportunity. The girl straightened her shoulders and massaged her slightly swollen lower back. Today she planned to spend a bath day, only taking into account that they did not have a bath in their estate. Therefore, it was necessary to get water from the column on the corner of the street, heat it, buy a boy a big Lohan, and offer the old man Evdokim Potapovich to wash himself behind the curtain in blue. Masha took the bucket and went out again. The wooden wing creaked at the slightest steps when she headed along the tramway to the water column. The local girls who looked at her because of their fences only humbly shook their heads, looking at the girl in the tracks. But Masha did not pay attention to them. She had enough to do without. When all the water was poured, Maria looked into the room where the child was sleeping peacefully and quietly started to put the buckets on the stove. Soon Vazia will wake up after a day's sleep, and then you can take a bath. Of course, it would be better in a city bath. But what can you do if there is no such opportunity yet? You need to adapt to what is there. There is already a lot of roof over your head, especially in today's times. Such a rural life was an extreme for an urban and remote girl. She never dreamed of living so far from civilization, and never in a sane and sober mind would have gone here to The first enemy was the rooster, who was hooking on the fence with a spazaranka. Maria got used to getting up not before a.m., but even before a.m., because she needed to get to work by a.m. And here, in the village, when the cattle in the stable are waiting, what a.m. can be like? With a heavy heart, Masha glared at the continuous hooking of the rooster. She somehow got into the clothes left by the bed in the evening and started another difficult day. First of all, it was necessary to feed the cow that stood and waited until Masha would wash the dead and come to her. At first, the girl was afraid to even go there, but then she got used to it. The hungry woman is not an ant, but she has a 3-year-old child in her house, who needs to drink milk and eat cottage cheese. Gradually, they even befriended each other with the cow and perhaps, no matter what she would not give now, to at least for a day, even for a couple of hours, to be in her own apartment where everything is provided for a comfortable life, and you do not need to constantly physically strain yourself. But dreams, as always, remain dreams. Because Masha could not get out of this voluntary confinement anywhere, and she did not want to be honest. The biggest number of problems brought her to life. A village life, which she was not accustomed to. It was easier for Masha to use a dishwasher, washing machine, iron, multi-cutter, but only in this place, in this world, where she seemed to be free now, with such a technique and did not smell. The water had to be washed in the well, and to do this, it was necessary to carry the water from the well and heated in advance, or to splash gently with your hands in the ice water, as the local ladies often did. But Masha preferred to work her back so as not to heal her hands from the ice water. The most often required to cook on a wood stove, because electricity was saved, and gas in the village and in the mine was never. It was not easy for Maria to get used to how to put the dish in the oven correctly and how to get it out of the. For example, there was no need to be nervous about work due to deadlines and averils, to worry about the reason of inaccuracy in documents, and to rush somewhere forever. Life just flowed in its own way, calmly, without hurrying. She had two loyal assistants, whom she affectionately called Old and Young. This was the little Yorkie Vasiaka and the old, but still quite strong and cheerful old man named Yevdokim Potapovich. If it were not for the wise advice of the old man, who told Masha everything she now knew about the village, she would not be able to stand it here for a day. This man taught her everything. He helped and gave advice to everyone he could. While Masha was doing household chores in the yard, he was watching over Vazia with pleasure. The boy grew up a lively, and extremely curious. If it weren't for Grandpa Yevdokim, there would have been trouble. Masha herself did not know at what time and where danger could come from. There was no such thing as a kindergarten in the village, because the boy was always at home with Masha and Grandpa. Then Masha had to immediately clean up and wash everything, including the shelves, so that the dirt would not eat in. Vazia managed to get into the container with the dough that Masha left for pies or bread. The consequences were about the same, except that washing the dough was easier. In the yard, the boy was making a good cover, and then Masha ran around the garden, collecting the rotted chickens. But the girl understood. The child is not crazy because he is bad, but because he is bored and has nowhere to put his efforts. If she could find a friend for games and communication, it would be great. Where can I get them? Where can I find out about such mothers? Here in the village, the girl has not yet had time to get acquainted with her friends. She was not ready for that. Maria was born and grew up in a large industrial town, km from the village, where she was trying not to rummage too much with buckets on the stove, so as not to wake up the boy who slept in the next room. They had the most ordinary family. Mom, Dad, and her. The only and very desirable child. Masha's childhood was about the same as that of many of her peers at that time. Some kind of entertainment in her free time. That is, her whole life was full of prosperity and joy. Her family was not too wealthy, but at the same time, she always had money for all the necessities. Masha did not remember that she needed something, so her life went smoothly. The first serious problems began when her father died unexpectedly. He was young and healthy, did not abuse alcohol, and did not seem to have any problems at all. But look at you. You came home from work one evening, sat in a chair, complained to your wife about the pain in her chest, and the ambulance team that your mother called did not wait for you. After that, it was a difficult time for Masha and her mother. Not only did their father take care of the family, but the apartment they lived in together was also entirely his. So, they barely let the coffin into the ground, and at the threshold of the orphaned granddaughter and her mother, there appeared Masha's grandmother by her father, a powerful and insolent woman who once was against the marriage of her parents and the girl, and who was carefully kept away from her family by her father all these years. But then it was impossible to just close the door in front of her nose. Grandma, if you can call her that, a woman who for 9 years of her life Masha saw only once before that moment, walked through their cute and cozy 2-room apartment, crudely touched the sock of a dog's bowl in the corridor, and then, for a long time and in high tones, argued with the mother of the girl. Masha didn't understand what was going on between them, but she could hear the despair that was through her mother's voice. The girl already understood that something bad was happening, something that she couldn't influence. A little later it turned out that this so-called grandmother told her son's family that she would definitely be entitled to inheritance. and not for the sake of her granddaughter and her legal interests, as it is often done in such cases, but simply because she was the mother of the deceased and has full right to do so. Since the apartment was two-room, and according to the law, this miracle of the old woman was supposed to be exactly the third part, it was impossible to solve the problem with a simple joint residence. Indifferently pressing her shoulders, the grandmother demanded money for her share, or promised to sell her part to anyone who agreed to buy it. At that time, the times were bad, and Masha's mother had no doubt that they would find it, agree, buy it, even for the sake of registration. Because a third of a good and full-length car is quite a lot, based on the market value. Of course, it was possible to buy a third from her grandmother, but according to the mocking whispers of her mother-in-law, she understood that this version of the old cargo would not allow it. She waited so long for her chance to give birth to her and her child, whom she gave birth to from her son, that now it can't be any other way. The only legal and simple relative option that would give them a chance to part and never see each other is the sale of the whole house. Masha and her mother still had enough money to buy a modest one-room apartment, and as the grandmother would order her part, none of them were interested. Said, done. It was barely 6 months since they were legally deported. They simultaneously entered the inheritance rights and sold their housing. Masha understood that there were some problems related to her as a minor owner, but as a child it did not matter much then. The girl didn't know how much her mother cried out, and with some effort she ran away with the permission from the caretaker to sell her daughter's share with subsequent purchase of a separate apartment. The grandmother had time to celebrate there too. She informed the caretaker that her year-old child was planning to leave her head without a roof over her head. What a cold-hearted snake. But this problem was overcome. Grandmother never saw Masha since then, and with her mother they bought a nice one-room apartment near their old house. Life went on in its own way, slowly and seemingly correctly. Masha went to school, her mother worked, they spent a great time together in the evenings. Mother did not start new relationships because she considered it a betrayal of Masha's father's memory. And what new relationships can a woman have with a very modest salary, with whom, besides, a little daughter is in her hands? There were, of course, those who tried to approach her and persuade her, but they were not interested in her. She did not need anyone except her dead husband, although she was still young. Under her mother's wing, the girl grew up to be a full-time student. She even managed to go to university and had already studied 2.5 years. Masha always liked to deal with numbers, and that's why she went to the Faculty of Economics. Of course, it was not easy, but with accurate sciences, the girl was always a great friend from school. Mom assured her that it was from her father, who was an engineer and an electronic engineer, and a good specialist. Mom started to get sick gradually, but the trouble did not foreshadow anything. It was either there or there. The heart was beating more and more every month, stronger and stronger, until Mom was in the station. Then, I remember, Masha had a hard time, and to have time to prepare for the session, and to run to Mom a couple of times a day with hot broth, too, it is necessary. She was taking medicine, cheered with kind words, and at home at night she was in a pillow. Masha really loved her mother and understood that soon she might not become. So it happened. Masha was left alone at the tender age of years of age. At first she was completely deafened by her loss, and even didn't notice anything around her. But after half a year, she began to slowly accept the circumstances. Masha's situation was not desperate or particularly difficult. Yes, with money it was not that very good and abundant, but still she was paid some kind of support. The roof over her head was also quite reliable, and most importantly, one person. In the study, the successes were the most ordinary, one might even say ordinary, but the diploma should have been received without triplets. Good, such an average diploma. So, as they say, live and rejoice, Maria. But Masha couldn't do it with joy. Of course, she learned not to cry in the pillow, learned to think good things, not to be upset about the trifles, learned to make small gifts for herself, but could not become completely happy, relaxed, and calm. As if the young girl did not feel the support under her, was not sure about tomorrow. All the holidays went somehow fresh and uninteresting. All the days were like one another. All the weekends became boring and sad. Maria looked at the girls from her group with a slight sadness, who had fun and enjoyed life, and ran to dates with boys, and even managed to get married somehow. In other words, they just lived fully. Masha knew only one route: university, home, home, university. Not that she didn't want to have fun, just some spark was missing. The girl was very nothing. Tall, well-built, okay. As they say, everything is with her. Her hair was light red, thick and wavy, a little lower than a spatula. Her eyes were green, deep and plumped with long black eyelashes, cute face, and a pleasant smile. And there were guys who looked at her. But Masha was not lucky, as if she did not part with anyone. From those who started to flirt with her, all her girlfriends were already hanging out with boys, and Maria was thinking about the fact that she was not worse. But it's so scary to love, to trust someone. In the depths of her soul, Masha was afraid that it would turn out the way her parents did. She would not have to. She was a mother of a chosen one, and that's it. She would not give them a peaceful life. And she does not want such a fate. So lived the girl, almost not paying attention to the boys. Somehow calmly, without drama and hysterics, defended her diploma work, then passed state exams, and then, immediately after receiving the documents, got on with her first job. Actually, this job was not within the reach of her dream. Masha was a big enterprise economist who was engaged in construction and capital repairs. Simply put, she was a construction worker. For an economist, without work experience, it was extremely difficult and stressful activity. But what can you do? You need to gain experience somehow. Why not here? In any case, it's better than sitting without work. And there, in this very construction company, she somehow got involved with a young communication specialist, a cheerful, pleasant, and in all respects beautiful guy named Ivan amazed the girl's imagination with his communicability and business. He came to the office to solve his problems, in breaks between the main work, but at the same time, he also managed to fix what he had long demanded to fix. Chat, give some trifle, and in general, show off the best side. Masha also liked Ivan. Every time, Ivan and his friends in the past were left without paid salary on time because of its predecessor. And with this, everything went well. It is considered on time, paid on time. What else is needed for happiness? At first, young people communicated just like that, at work. And this communication was rather friendly than loving, and did not look for any of them love. It was so easy and pleasant to distract from the work duties and problems related to them for a while and talk about Tom, about Sayo. Ivan came most often during lunch break and would definitely bring with him chocolate, a box of cookies, or just sweets in a bag. It doesn't matter what. The main thing is that tea is pleasant and timely. Maria didn't have any debt. She would drink good tea or delicious coffee, as he liked it, more strongly. Ivan and Masha talked about everything in the world, about each of their lives, about hobbies and hobbies, about work and rest, and just about what bothers the other. Gradually, their seats became familiar, and Masha prepared for them carefully. She dissolved her hair in the morning, painted it as if without marking the lips, even dressed more feminine. Our beauty melted. Half joking, half seriously, women from the accounting department talked about her. And sometimes Masha caught herself thinking that yes, she melted. With Ivan, Masha was interesting. Everything was new. She did not imagine that it was possible to anticipate a meeting with another person. Working boring days suddenly became a real holiday and an exciting adventure, because in the middle of the working day, exactly at noon, Ivan will come for tea, and they will certainly talk about everything in the world again. Meanwhile, Ivan was not as easy to communicate as it might seem. Yes, he was actually a guy in a shirt who was always on fire, always on water. But sometimes he looked at Masha so carefully that her frost was running through her back, as if he was evaluating her young man. What will he say in one or another case? What will he do? How will he act? How will he behave? Not everyone likes to be on such an exam. And that's why Masha was sometimes afraid of him. And then she got used to it and realized that nothing bad was happening to Ivan. He's just a man. Suspiciously painful. Maria told her little and no special story. And what was there to tell? About her father who died in her childhood. So now half of the story, if not more, is very similar. About her mother who left this world 4 years ago. It's sad, but it's life. So there was nothing in her biography that could interest Vanya and serve as a worthy topic for conversation. Sometimes Masha was shy. Ivan seemed so smart, modern, competent in all respects, and an interesting interlocutor that she couldn't imagine what else could shock his imagination. And the guy, as if feeling the doubt of the young girl, poured oil into the fire by the fact that sometimes he made her light, nothing like insignificant compliments. And from these words, Masha immediately blushed like a May rose. Such relationships without relationships, hints and overlooking, have been going on for almost half a year. But none of the two young people decided to take the first step and finally show your interest in someone else openly. Of course, if Maria was a little more experienced in matters of relationships, she would have long understood that this man is just playing with her, or, in other words, wants to meet her. But she still had no experience of communicating with boys, and therefore she did not understand that her sympathy was mutual. About the object of her great and hot interest, the girl knew very little. She only knew that Ivan lived somewhere on the outskirts, in a dormitory, in one room with other boys from their company. At the same time, Ivan's salary was quite decent, since he was quite valuable to the specialists. On Masha's unadulterated look, a young guy could quite well rent an apartment and live with much more comfort. But Ivan, apparently, saved money on something. Masha did not consider it necessary and possible to get into a person's soul and ask him why he needed money, because who would refuse them now? But the famous female curiosity that, as I remember, ruined the cat? No, and she made Masha ask a couple of questions. But she was stoically silent. Who will like it when they sneak into your soul? Yes, and the concept of comfort is quite broad. Someone like Maria is definitely giving a separate room and all the convenience under the side, and someone calmly enjoys the only shower on the floor and will be in such conditions even quite happy. Ivan was apparently just one of these, especially since Masha already knew that the guy was from the village and came here to earn money. He was barely, so he stayed in the city for almost years. The conversation that allowed Maria and Ivan to set all the points above the I took place on a long March evening. Then Masha sat at work for a long time because she had to finish the documentation in a month, and Vanya, like a real gentleman, called her to his house, so that no one would attack. He simply and unambiguously explained to the man his action. And in general, it is customary in our village that a man always escort a woman, even if he goes in the light and familiar way. Masha, of course, did not resist. She just took her bag, pulled the hood over her head with such a count that the cover, as it should be, closed her face from the wind, and stepped into the darkness of the spring night. Following her, as her silent and unreachable shadow followed Vanya, they talked under the wavy entrance. The girl decidedly did not want to let the guy home in such weather without drinking this delicious tea. Yes, she cooked hot yesterday, so she can even feed. Ivan did not refuse the treat and sat down at the table. Young people were talking a lot and enthusiastically. Who, with whom, when and why. The conversation turned to the person, and Masha mentioned that she had no serious relationships in her life until now. just because she didn't want it. And now you want it? Ivan asked, and she seemed to be burning with heat. She wanted to shout, yes, that the girl barely held on, and began to set the table for tea. Probably, Maria tried to give her voice a slight uncertainty. Most likely, it's time. Ivan whined, but said nothing. Instead, the man made a couple of sips from a thin porcelain cup that Masha gave him as a guest. It was the best of the dishes in the house. And then he began to tell about his own personal life. Only now Maria has understood the reasons for many, at first glance, illogical and inconsequential vandalism. It turned out that the guy, by his youth and stupidity, began to meet with his former classmate Elena, who soon got pregnant from him. As they say, nothing is new under the moon. In the village, such stories happen quite often and could not be called a rarity. However, the continuation of all such stories is the same. Zax, or the village council, and then the joint life and birth of a child in marriage. Such a life did not always go well, and such families did not always become happy. And how can they always be happy if the reason for the marriage was a baby, not true love? It is rare for someone to be lucky to get a companion for life in this way. Most often, the young women who are in prison for marriage are not long-term. Moreover, after school, it has been several years, and Elena was not celebrated with anyone at the Cinnaval. Yes, Ivan also had girls. It was not possible to get married, because no one had serious feelings. But the novels are given to try, to learn, to learn. Ivan refused to marry Elena, which caused the squalor of discontent at his address. The potential bride was outraged, too. What did her boyfriend think about avoiding responsibility, and her numerous relatives, and even the so-called everywhere representatives of society in the form of their school teachers, librarians, FAP workers, and council members? In short, everyone decidedly and everyone interpreted that Ivan is obliged to immediately drag Elena under the veneer. Or he is just a bad person who wants to abandon and abdicate his own child. But Ivan did not succumb to such blackmail. He told everyone that he would certainly help his mother and child materially and not abandon their son or daughter. But marrying Elena will not be for any rags. And in general, two are always responsible for the child. Elena also picked up the berries in the garden so that the baby would be born. So the responsibility to bear them is mutual. After such a statement, Ivan's village was in a mess for several days. Even the delegation, gathered from all over the village, was sent to Ivan's house to make him go to the village council with a disgraced girl right now. But Ivan knew his own thing. I will not go. I will help the boy. I don't need a girl. Let her figure it out herself. Ivan's relatives had only one old father for a long time. He actually raised the boy after his mother and grandmother died of tuberculosis one after another. Vanya himself then walked under the table. Then Yevdokim took care of him, although he was old, because the child was born very late. Helped as he could. His son never walked hungry, barefoot, or undressed. The wise man knew everything. He knew everything, and he taught his son a lot. Together with Vanya, they hunted in the forest, set up villages, went fishing, and repaired motorcycles in the barn. Ivan Yevdokim was the word for his mother and father. The elderly Yevdokim was the only one who supported his son. On the one hand, he understood him purely by men, and on the other, he believed that such free modern morals would not bring good to girls, and they need to be taught by their mind, and mind. And his only son has nothing to spoil his life. No matter what happened there in youth and stupidity, it was necessary to think together. And now what? Elena will get Ivana on her neck, and that's it. She's married. And the guy passed on her and on her family. Is that so? No, not so. It's better to really help the child then, and that's enough. The delegation that brought them into the yard, the old Yevdokim, just drove away. And without being shy to say that in that case, if they don't leave immediately, the dog will be let down on them. and the dog is big and ferocious, so it's better to hurry up. But Ivan, who was sitting in the house and was shivering from the thought, advised him to immediately pack his things and leave for the city. "Where should I go, father?" Ivan sighed, not raising his gaze from the bench he was sitting on. "But that doesn't matter anymore. You can get a job in the city and earn a living. I graduated from school a long time ago. I worked in a village. You have all kinds of experience. It's summer in the yard. Maybe you can even get a job somewhere. Well, or then stay and hang this Elena with her child on your neck. It is not known yet if it is yours. Do you want it that way?" Ivan thought, and agreed that the father was right. In the city he will settle, he will start to earn. There will be an opportunity to even send a little money. And then who will he go to earn? Tractors. So they will not take without a crust. To throw the manure on the farm? I wouldn't want to. It's a young thing. But it's not in the past to go in the very business. So the question was solved. It was difficult for Ivan to gather like this and leave behind everything he had and everything he knew. Although who would be in this situation would be easy. Father escorted him with the best of his abilities, and Ivan almost cried, as in childhood, not in the strength to take his eyes off the gray old man, pressing his palm and muscular hands. "How can I leave you, father?" Ivan asked in such a voice that Yevdokim heard. Now he will really cry. It's a big deal that the adult has already blown out, and the father loves. Yevdokim answered Ivan that nothing will happen to him, that he is still strong, and it's a waste that he is gray as a moon, and that the return of Ivan from the city will certainly wait. But it should not happen now, and not even in the next year, because otherwise Elena will not be able to cope and people will not give her life. Ivan realized that the advice of his father was better to follow. Then everything would be fine in his life. He hugged the old Yevdokim the last time before the long road and went to the bus stop. After a few hours, the guy was already in the city. Ivan was unlucky at first. He thought he could get a job at a local school, which would provide him with a roof over his head and a job. But it didn't work out. He was late. He was told that the company was already over. Well, Ivan didn't get confused. He went to the local employment service, because at one point, one of the luckiest villagers heard about that here you can get at least someplace. And here his hands and hard work turned out to be surprisingly almost immediately in demand. Since Ivan was not afraid of any work, he was offered the position of a construction worker. Ivan did not even think about it, but immediately agreed. Since the guy was ungrateful in life, he lived in a house, he did everything they said. He ate modestly, and he was paying off the money he earned. Then the brigadier, looking at Ivan's indecency and his hard work in solving any problem, began to send him to the builders of various specialties with the order to teach Ivan what they were doing. So he got some idea about the work of a carpenter, a stonemaker, a plasterer, and several other professions in all the settings. Such a versatile assistant helped Brigadier a lot in everything, because he was considerate and could do a lot even himself, without a master over his soul. Ivan began to gradually move up the career ladder, if you can call it a construction work. Soon he became a real irreplaceable specialist and Brigadier's right hand. Now he has a new life, and no problems have been foreseen for a long time. Meanwhile, the months passed, and Elena gave birth to a boy. He was named Vasily in honor of her father, grandfather of the child. However, she was just disgusting to her mother. No, she did not offend the child and did not beat him, but she also did not want to get used to the former free way of life. The young mother often threw her screaming child at her younger sister or mother and went to her girlfriends to have fun. It was a bit strange not to let Elena go. Then she caused loud scandals throughout the village. Most often, the person who was guilty of such a situation was Ivan. After all, if it were not for his decision to leave and leave her with her son, she would have been a married woman and would have been walking around for nothing. But since she does not have a reliable shoulder, it is necessary to look for him. It was such a job, unreliable and unproductive. That's why Elena disappeared without a trace. That's why she gave her son little time. Ivan, of course, knew about it. The old man told him everything that concerned Elena or the baby. But to return to the village, because Elena turned out to be a disgusting mother, Ivan did not wish it. On the contrary, he sincerely wished Ivan to settle in the city, buy his own home there, and live in his own pleasure. Ivan could not manage to get a house, and he even understood why. But he still did not lose hope and saved. Even a little, but he saved. He put every free penny that he had not spent on life in a cube. He hoped that someday he would be able to buy an apartment, if not in the city itself, at least in the suburbs. As I promised, Elena also sent a little money. But she wanted more, and here they always had quarrels. The girl blamed her ex-lover for being too stingy, and he, in turn, insisted that she spend money with her mind. If you are such a transgyra that you lack them for a child, then refuse him, and I will raise Vazhya, he said and forgot. But Elena didn't forget. One day, Yevdokim called his son in great excitement and confusion. He said that this morning Elena took Vaska, who hadn't turned to her arms, and just threw him out. His poor wardrobe and a couple of cheap cars came with the boy, and that's it. Nothing else. The loving mother didn't start the child's need to be passed on. Of course, such a question is a lot of questions, but the task is good to say to Ivan, bring it and I will raise it. And what to do now? Where to put the boy now? On the father again, all to dump. So he is a grandfather, old. He himself will soon need help. So now Ivan was in a difficult time thinking about who to grow his heir to, while the father is still somehow squeaking and is engaged in the child. What will happen if he gives up on her? Ivan doesn't want to think about it, because he has no options. It's expensive for him to rent an apartment to live with a boy. He doesn't always get rich orders for construction. And to go back to the village to raise a son, it will earn him less. In other words, he will always be a loser. Masha is interested in listening to this story of a man with whom she has been working side by side for so long. But she didn't know about him. Ivan liked her. He had to admit, at least for himself, he liked her. And even the fact that the man had a year-old child at the time of the shock didn't scare her away. Vanya probably understood perfectly what feelings he was awakening in Masha, because he slowly leaned towards her and touched her lips with her lips. And then he moved away a little, hugged him for a minute, and ran to the bus while they were still walking in his remote area. The next day their meeting was already unusual. At the tea room at lunch break, Ivan brought her flowers. And where did he get such fresh and beautiful flowers? Masha was happy. This is her first bouquet, received as a gift from a man. Life went on in its own way. Ivan offered Masha to meet, and she, of course, could not refuse him. Gradually, their relationship developed and reached a new level. Ivan stopped going to his dormitory at night and spent most of his time in Maria's apartment, which he now called his girlfriend. Masha was incredibly fond of such a treatment, and she honestly loved this man. She just got used to the fact that Ivan is always around and always helps her, takes care of her, does not leave her alone with heavy thoughts, in other words, fully participates in her life. Ivan really made life easier for Maria. He brought her somewhere, repaired her somewhere, cooked her somewhere, cleaned her somewhere. So now everything she used to do exclusively by herself, from now on, it was twice as fast and twice as easy. That's how summer flew by, unnoticed and somehow suspiciously fast. Once Ivan even took Maria to his village to meet his sons and father. He already knew that Ivan had a girlfriend in the city, and he met Maria even more politely than she could have expected. In the village, Masha liked it. Despite the fact that she grew up in the city and considered herself a child of asphalt and concrete, she was spacious and comfortable there. Masha liked the interior of a simple one-story rural house in which Vazhya and Evdokim lived. Their carefree life, abundance of greens, herbs, smells, and fruits with vegetables. pulling a red apple on her hand. And Masha took, bit, chewed, and realized that she had never eaten anything tastier in her life. The same story was with vegetables. Masha was one of those who prefers to think that carrots, potatoes, cucumbers, tomatoes, beetroot, and much more naturally appears on the shelves of supermarkets and shops. She rarely thought about the fact that all this first needs to be grown and brought to the city. But now she saw with her own eyes how much work needs to be put in order for her to be able to enjoy fresh vegetable salad. Ivan laughed to tears when he saw how Maria carefully tasted her stretched cucumber, just torn from the grater and torn from the floor of the t-shirt. And what a magical smile appears on her face at the moment when she understands you can't make it tastier, of course. Some villagers of the village were angry at Masha, and there were reasons for it. She understood perfectly well that many people remember Elena, who was now unknown where, and compared her to her city girl when, look, city girl. That's what was going on in Maria's back. She barely got out on the road and was walking somewhere in the village. The girl tried not to pay attention to this, but still it was not easy. Ivan asked her to react calmly and reminded her that only she loves her. What happened with him and Elena, in fact, is all in the past. Now they need to look into the future together, which means not to think about the bad. The girl agreed with him. One day, Ivan took her to a store that was not far away. Actually, he was the only one in the village, and near this insatiable village of Mega, there were always friends who had nothing to do at home. When Ivan and Masha crossed the threshold, there was complete silence. Under the accompaniment of this silence, the boy and the girl made purchases, put them in a bag, and were already going to leave. Finally, the voice of some middle-aged woman came out, who was almost at the exit and was looking at the couple carefully. Ivan, you should at least introduce your girlfriend, or you walk like strangers. What is her name? This is Masha, my fiancée. Vanya calmly answered, taking her hand and walking to the door. They barely came out, and immediately behind their backs, numerous lovers started to chat and gossip. Masha walked along the dusty road with Ivan, and she was so confused to ask what was going on. Does he really think so? Or is it all just to show that he doesn't want to carry a sledgehammer around the village? Apparently, the man guessed what was on her mind, so he turned to her and calmly said, I hope you won't mind if we really get married someday. You cannot give an answer right away, but think, but I will wait anyway. Masha decided to take advantage of the opportunity provided to her not to answer right away. On the one hand, Ivan is not a couple to her, and tall and beautiful, and work in the hands of anyone argue. But if you look at the situation differently, then he has a 3-year-old almost boy who grows up without a mother, and an elderly father who will need help soon. Besides, Ivan will never be able to earn enough money for his apartment, and therefore they will all have to live together in her territory. Not exactly what she actually dreamed of. But without Ivan, she will not be able to. She does not want to live without these warm hands, gentle lips, gentle voice, and readiness to always come to help. Because there can be no doubt. She, of course, will accept his offer and become Ivan's wife. Before the very return to the city, this topic was not raised by either Masha or Ivan. Everyone had, apparently, their own reasons to keep silent. But then, having found himself in the walls of his apartment, Maria whispered to Ivan that she was ready to stay with him for the rest of her life. And by his reaction, she saw that he was happy. Well, that's great. We'll have to make a wedding, call people, relatives, acquaintances, friends. I have no one. Masha called out without a heart. But I have one. Ivan hugged her. Even more than necessary. I'll have to go to the village for a wedding. Maria agreed to everything. And to celebrate their engagement in the village. And to call everyone who she thinks is needed. And she really doesn't have any relatives or friends. In other words, no one to be invited. Even the bride's friend would have to ask to become someone from work, because she doesn't really have any friends. Ivan didn't put the matter into a long box, and somehow in the evening, After returning from work, he suggested to Masha to discuss their future wedding. How many people should be present there, in her opinion? How many days to celebrate? Honestly, such questions were strange for Masha. She didn't think about this at all. And what's the difference, really? The main thing is that they love each other. I would like us to celebrate the wedding in the summer, Ivan said in the meantime. So it's easier to organize everything, and it won't be too difficult with treats. Maria nodded, not wanting to argue with the groom. Summer is summer. It's already autumn. Will they be able to wait a little before they become a couple? She will definitely be able to. So everything will be fine. Masha and Ivan continued to work together calmly, and it seemed that nothing could stop this couple from loving each other. And she was impressed that Vanya helped her at home and didn't even think of falling on the couch instead of wiping the floors or cleaning potatoes for dinner. And Masha also had one thought about their common future, which must definitely be beautiful. Vanya doesn't have a mother who she might not like as a bride. And that means everything will definitely be fine. Grom grumbled as it often happens suddenly, among complete prosperity. It was raining and damp November in the yard. After returning from work, I wanted to quickly change into warm home pajamas and hide under the blanket to read my favorite book or watch some interesting movie. But all plans were interrupted by a persistent and disgusting, as is usually the case, phone call. Ivan took the phone. I listened to the invisible interlocutor for a long time, and then turned to Masha and said with an upset voice, "They took my father to the district hospital. They suspect that something is wrong with his heart. Vaska, while the neighbor is awake, needs to go to the district hospital and see what's going on there." Masha understood very well what Ivan was going through. We are all children until our parents are alive, and I want to delay these years for as long as possible. Maria sincerely wished for the recovery of her beloved father and took care of Vazhya's life. And what about the boy? If Dad stays in the hospital for a long time, what will he do with the neighbor? Ivan was indecisive and answered that he did not know. And he really did not know. He understood, of course, that sooner or later the moment would come when Dad would not only be able to take care of Vazhya, but even take care of himself. But he did not think that it would happen so quickly. When Ivan came to the district hospital, he was told that his father was alive and was feeling relatively well. For the first time, everything went well, and in a couple of days he could be taken home. Well, that's a problem. How can one father be left without a caretaker? Come on, if only one, and then to live with Vasily. If something happens to one, then the other will have a hard time. It's good that this time the villagers saw that Yevdokim was sick and called the doctors. What if something happens at night? What if they don't see? What if? Ivan shared his thoughts on this with Maria. Just like that, without any thought. And they began to discuss together what to do in this case. Ivan was thrown out of work and went to the village to watch the old man and the little boy grow. And what about work? And what about prospects? And Masha is alone here. How? There is nowhere to take my father and my son. Masha has a small one-room apartment, not enough space for everyone, and Ivan cannot earn enough money for a separate apartment. But there is not enough joy to go to the shooting. Stability is important here, and his salary is jumping from month to month. Masha noticed that Ivan was suspiciously looking at her, and as if he wanted to say something, but pretended not to pay attention to it. Apparently, if he considers it necessary to speak, he will tell what he thinks. So it happened. Ivan took Masha into his own hands and spoke with a deep, low voice, from which she always threw it into the heat or into the cold. "My dear, I wanted to offer you. I don't even know how you will react to this. I just wanted to say, and you think they're yourself, and we will do as you say. In general, why don't you go to my father in Vazhya for a while? And I would stay here. We'll earn money. We can rent a house, or even buy something inexpensive. Then we can go together right before the wedding. That would be good, right?" Something that Masha intuitively expected from Ivan, but she didn't think she would dare to offer it to her. to the place where there is no civilization, where she knew almost nothing, to take care of a sick old man and a small child, who also has no little relationship with her. To be honest, this is not a dream offer. And the job, how to quit it? Does she want to stay without a job in such a difficult time? But on the other hand, how to refuse Ivan at his request? And if he thinks about her, that she is cold, heartless, and refused to marry her. But she loves him so much. Maria didn't think long. Of course, she didn't have any desire to go to the 3/9 land, lose her job and her own income, take care of two people of different ages in the village hut. But as her mother taught in her time, family life is always concessions. Maria agreed. Of course, Ivan immediately fell apart in gratitude. And the girl was standing, dead or alive. Why did she agree? Should she solve such problems for her fiancé? Why leave her well-off apartment and leave for somewhere else? But the deal was done and the agreement was given. Because Masha had nothing left to do but to pack her things and go to his village with Ivan. Days of new reality have come. Of course, Masha was probably bored of the city, of her well-off apartment, of her job, but mostly of Ivan. She wanted him to be with her and help her carry the burden that she, of course, voluntarily carried for him. Ivan called her periodically, but communication in the village was disgusting, and he also called not always. Masha had to climb up the roof of the house with her mobile phone, and she quickly gave up this idea. So she had to cope with her own strength and hope that Ivan would be able to solve the problem with the apartment as soon as possible. Masha repeatedly thought about long winter nights. And does this person really need it, that for his sake she went to such a complete self-denial? She can no longer live in the usual place. She has what she likes, even enjoys her simple comfort in her own apartment, and she has to take care of two completely strangers. Is that what she would like her youth to be like? Isn't that an excessive payment for being in a relationship with Ivan? And then, who guarantees that they will have everything smooth with Vanya? Now, of course, Vasya will not go anywhere, and she will have to become his mother. Does she want this? An old man who requires care, and who can soon easily be in her hands. Is this also the limit of her dreams? Did she think well before agreeing? But the habit did not give Masha the opportunity to simply refuse to carry the cart that she voluntarily threw at herself. Every time they had a little talk on the phone with Ivan, through the crack of a hindrance, she heard how he was bitterly thanking her for her help, and she continued to persuade herself that a good and bright future would come. You just have to endure it, at least until summer, and then they will marry you, and everything will be in its place. Evdokim Potapovich seemed to understand what sacrifices a girl went to for him and his little grandson, and in every way showed her her position. The old man helped her in everything he could, and Masha was happy to use his help. Without Evdokim Potapovich, she would not have lived a day in the village. He hinted, reminded, showed, and advised. In a word, he painted potential bridesmaids' hard village days. Vasyaka was a good, cute, obedient child, but it was clearly seen that no one had ever been a part of it before. He just didn't have a person who was ready to run, jump, play ball, and play other noisy games with him. And he also learned to help a little, swinging with a small shovel to throw snow away, or with a tiny basket for collecting eggs in the hen house, or with something else. Masha was glad that she had such a thoughtful assistant, but he needed him eye to eye, and she always had things to do. So she had to spin to look at Vasya and do something about the household. The local women condemned her for the first time. As the girl understood, it was precisely because she was in touch with a man who defamed Elena and refused to marry her. Although what can I say? Masha also sincerely believed that both were good in that ugly story. Elena still abandoned her son, and Ivan is not. Even with the help of a father and a bride, she grows. Even sends money. Not much, though. And there is still a pension of Evdokim Potapik, and they will live. Still, the village is all its own. full of vegetables and vegetables. There is always milk, butter, cheese, cottage cheese, sour cream, and eggs. So maybe it's good that Ivan sends them little money. He will quickly accumulate, and they will finally be able to reunite all together in one apartment. Because it is so difficult for her to get a job in this village. Then the local women, seeing that Masha does not offend the old man and tries to follow the boy, no worse than her own mother, began to help her. Not many, of course, because they're in the village, you can't really get around with help. Everyone has their own farm, but why not for small things? And they showed her how to make it better and more clever and showed and could watch over her if she needed to do something urgently, and she was not feeling well after such a trip. Masha was always rushing to call her at work and ask how things were going in her hometown. She still could not get used to the fact that she no longer worked there, and her heart was still longing for the rhythm of life. When Maria, shy and lowering her eyes down, as if going to do something bad, she brought the statement to the boss, to be fired at her own will. He looked at her for a long time from the bottom of his eyes, and then asked if she was sure of her decision. Maria, of course, could not be sure of anything, and answered honestly as it is, without embellishing anything. She also told why she made such a decision. The boss was not that strict, but he was still quite loyal to the man's employees in his old age. He considered it his duty to instruct his young subordinates on the rights of his father, and now he could not remain indifferent to this story. He asked Maria to think it over and try to find some other way out of this situation with the groom. But alas, Masha thought that any other version of the development of events would become a betrayal towards Ivan. Then the boss told her that the statement would of course be signed, but at any moment Masha was waiting for it. You are good employees. I had no problems with you. I think that in that case, if you change your decision or understand that something went wrong, we will come up with a place for you. Maria thanked him from the bottom of her heart and ran out of the office with the signed statement. In this working atmosphere. But he took a bite. Don't say he's not a douchebag. Masha patiently dragged this cart from the problems imposed on her by others and didn't even notice how her shoulders were getting lower and lower bend. Then the boy got sick. Then the old man got sick. Then the cow got sick. Then the hen forgot to close the lid for the night. Everything was one-to-one. Maria sometimes started to count the days that remained until summer, which means until her return to the city, to her own apartment. Although, is it her own? They will not be able to fit together on her square meters, so we will have to look for something and shoot. Oh, and another problem on her head. But it's okay. The main thing is that they have everything good with Vanya, and that everything at his work would work out stably. Then everything would come true, what they dreamed of together, in those magical moments when hand in hand, eyes in eyes, and on the cheek feels light, barely noticeable breath of beloved. For the sake of experiencing this more often, Maria was not ready for such sacrifices. Ivan, meanwhile, in their very rare, assured Masha that everything was under her control and everything was going well, that she needed to save some more money, and he would gladly invite her to move into their new apartment. Well, and traditionally promised the bride some kind of impressive surprise on its own scale. Masha listened to the voice of her beloved with a heart stopping, and she wanted time to fly faster, so that there was no snow anymore, and it was spring and the gardens bloomed, so that summer would come sooner, and together with him, and a wedding dress with a wish and such a long-awaited surprise. When it really got warmer outside, the dawn came. Living in the city for almost a quarter of a century, Maria could not fully understand what it was. Now, being in the village, the girl understood the essence of this unpleasant concept literally from the first time. While she was holding her eyes, all roads became wet, viscous, and impassable swamp. The locals said that even the tractor will not always and not everywhere will be cleared. Of course, it's not spring yet, and soon the frost will come again, and the soil will be soiled, and the soil will become roads again. But now, At this time, it was simply impossible to drive, neither in the village nor from it. Maria was already used to doing household chores. When she heard Vajia coughing, it was intense, hard, with some kind of wheezes in the breaks. She didn't like such coughing. The girl came closer to the child, looked into her eyes and touched her forehead. Her eyes were muddy, not as cheerful and sparkly as usual, and her forehead seemed very hot. In the house, as she already found out some time ago, there was not even a thermometer, and often carried colds on their feet and raised their children since childhood. According to the already mentioned opinion, the year-old child who is ill should be examined immediately, and therefore she, without a minute of hesitation, went to the FAP, which stood alone, leaning against the wooden side of the village council wall. Maria had to go through the sticky building 4 times and knock on the window, so that those inside could hear her. Felsher agreed to come home and look at the baby, and Maria ran to the baby, waiting for the nurse next to Vajia. When, after minutes, the woman in her middle age appeared at their door, she immediately, hearing the boy's cough, said with authority, "I need medicine. Laryngospasm is in him. I'll give him a shot now and it will be a little easier." This happens to children. If the road wasn't taken apart, they would have taken you to the district, but you see for yourself, you can't get there. So drive yourself, on a tractor with Nikitic. You want to go to the city, and you want to go to the region. I'll take Vaska to the FAB, so don't worry about him. I have a couple of ampoules of the medicine I need, but it's enough for the first time. You go to the city and come back later. Maybe in the morning, but don't wait any longer, okay? Maria still had no choice. Sighed that Vajia is not in danger yet. She gathered a couple of sandwiches with butter and sausage on the way and ran to the local tractor driver Nikitic to agree to take him to the highway on her tractor. And there are already buses and trains going. There she will figure out and be able to get to the city. Troubles and worries left Masha only when she was already tired of the city. Today she was just lucky, and Nikitic agreed to take her without any objection, finding out why she needed to go to the city. And the first bus on the highway stopped at the moment of her hand, and even the place in it was free. In other words, it can't be better. In the first bus that got to the Leopoldovsk station and pharmacy, Maria bought everything that the filter wrote to her and looked at the bus schedule back. Great. She still has time today. The last flight is at. We will have to call Nikitic somehow and ask her to meet us later. But these are small things. The main thing is that she still has a lot of time and she will be able to visit Ivan. The idea that she will now see her beloved made Masha quickly suffocate. How good is that? Of course, he is at work now, but how happy would he be if Maria would cook something tastier for his return? Many people carried her to the bus stop themselves. It didn't take half an hour, as Masha was already entering the home entrance. How much she missed it, and all this and Vanya. How good it was that she managed to escape. Masha turned the key and quietly entered. She expected it to be dark and quiet, but no. At the sound of the lock, some woman ran out. Masha didn't believe her eyes at first. Who is it? Maybe she got the wrong place, confused the doors, went into the wrong entrance? But then the girl said, "Who are you? What do you want?" "I'm Masha," the girl laughed. "Very nice. So you're Masha, his sister. That's great that we met. And I'm Lika, his girlfriend. Well, don't stand here. Come in. We'll have some tea now. Vanya will be here soon." Masha clapped her eyes, trying to figure out what she had just heard. Lika? A bride? Masha? A sister? Maybe she still doesn't understand something? Or is she in a fever? Or is she not able to think soberly? Meanwhile, Lika didn't care. She talked and talked, and Maria was forced to quietly listen, trying to figure out what was going on here. "How good that you came in. Otherwise, I would be alone in Vanya's apartment like a whore. He leaves for work in the morning, and I sit here, with no one to talk to. You don't mind that I took your coat, do you?" Vanechka allowed. He said that in his apartment I can take everything I need. And you left for the village, right? Because your father's child was abandoned and now you're raising him alone there? Vanya said. He's kind and very untruthful. He even sent you a couple of times money so that his nephew, your son, didn't need anything. Oh, and what is this? I gave it all to you. Come on, Masha. Okay? Maria hardly grasped the meaning of what was said, but it seemed she began to slowly understand what was what. Consciousness cleared up, but Masha did not see anything good for herself personally. Alika was talking and talking, but Masha did not stop her. Let her say, she will have arguments for Vanechka. Let her only come back from work. And we just thought about selling the apartment. Well, Vanya has been thinking for a long time, but he still does not like the options that he has looked at. He feeds me with breakfasts. Maybe you will persuade him to do it as soon as possible. You understand that we are not a perfect couple. We need to find at least two. Maria, I'm sorry, but the fact that we can't move yet is your fault. If you didn't pull money from Ivan to your son, we would have been a house for a long time. And it turns out that he contains a nephew, and when you order him to live, you will do it yourself. You must come up with something to keep my Ivan from getting addicted. He's your son, not his. You should be ashamed of yourself. Why should we feed him? Masha was already on the verge of breaking down and telling something to the naive girl, but then the key was locked in the well. Maria guessed that Ivan had done it. Well, now it will be a great surprise. It's a surprise for everyone. But how does Ivan react? Lika ran out to the hallway and said something to the one who came from work to her beloved about how she missed him for the whole day. Masha was in no hurry to go after her. She had to get her spirit together before she was going to do anything. And tears. The girl was filled with unfulfilled, unwanted, and untimely tears. But she was exhausted and went out into the corridor, quietly, slowly, with a stone expression on her face. Seeing Maria, who was standing behind Lika, putting her hands on her chest and looking at him with contempt and pain, the man hurried. He could not take his eyes off Masha, who did not take his eyes off him. Lika did not notice anything and continued to whisper about something of her own, refined and beautiful. Ivan was the first to remember. Hi, how are you doing here? He squeezed himself out. Vazha got sick. In fact, Masha answered. The face immediately interfered with the conversation. She turned Ivan's gaze on the guest, and her voice immediately became especially unpleasant and whimsical. Are you going to unbutton her again to treat this child? Please, leave. Why do I need a man who only does what other people's children are financed? Your nephew is not your son. You have a Vanechka. You will never have your own children if you keep giving your sister money. Then she turned to Masha and said without hesitation, Aren't you ashamed to keep on begging for money from him? You found a comfortable neck for yourself, and that's it. You're going until they drop you off? Try to find a better father for your child. It's his duty to keep his son. And not like you were born from some poor brood, and now you're carrying money from your brother. You didn't hear about tactfulness and politeness at all, did you? Of course, where do you need the village to have such concepts? Masha, with great pleasure, watched how Ivan reacted to this speech. He was ready to tear his hair off. Only now the man realized that everything he had been trying to build all these months collapsed and buried all his lies under himself. And that Lika is not a quiet and reckless Masha. She will not be silent. I heard. Masha briefly spoke, pressing on each word and not taking her eyes off Ivan's face. That being on someone else's residential area is perfectly treated by calling the police. So hurry up and disappear from here yourself until I check these rumors in practice. And you, girl, I advise you to better check the biography version that the next cavalry told you. Lika didn't understand anything. It was clearly visible from her confused face. Ivan, on the contrary, understood everything perfectly and instantly. Collect your things, he said to the girl, and went to the closet himself with a quick step. He then realized that Maria wasn't joking. What's the point of that? Lika smiled. We live here. It's your apartment. How can she scare us? Ivan didn't answer her. He quickly threw his blue sports bag into his clothes. Maria almost mercilessly watched him. Lika still couldn't understand why she was being ignored. And what could have changed so dramatically in her plans? Someone explain to me what is going on here. She barely cried when she saw Masha put a medicine in her bag with Vanya's things and whispered that they need to be given to the Feldsher. She said she knew what to do with them. Then Masha for the first time went to this stupid and evil girl. We need to explain to Lika what she got into thanks to Ivan. This apartment belongs to me, she replied calmly. And Ivan lived here on the rights of my Mary. Yes, a bridegroom, and not making round eyes. In the village, his illegitimate son and his old father remained. That is, the beggar that his child abandoned is this man, whom you affectionately call Ivashka. And his father is not in the best condition, by the way. But he, unlike his son, is a good and sincere person, living in their village house without a way out, without the slightest inconvenience. And Vanya is here in my house. As I look, I did not waste time. So, as you understand, now everything is over for him. I will now close the doors behind you and climb into the hot bath. And then I will call for work to recover there. And that's what you will do, and where you will go, I am no longer worried. Although if I find out from Feldsher, who stayed in the village, that Ivan didn't go to his son, I will show the last act of mercy towards this family and will inform the caretaker about the carefree, almost child. An elderly and through-the-bed grandchild cannot be considered a caretaker. So collect your things. How are you doing there? Collect and hurry for Vanya. By the way, while you are standing in the middle of the room and looking at me with round eyes, he himself has already jumped. The door slammed. Didn't you hear? Ah, he left you. Nothing new under the moon. Yes, yes. As I told you, it is better to check what belongs to whom, if you have already decided to cling to the apartment. Masha turned away from the leaky and let her calmly pack her things. Half an hour later, she was already washing the bathroom to get water with a shower foam and finally remember how good it was to, when you have the joys of civilization under your side. A young woman did not doubt that everything would be fine in her life.